From Arctic igloos to desert pueblos, native homes outlasted palaces of kings. One pueblo city stood for over 1,000 years, longer than most nations have existed. Here are amazing survival building hacks, and the last entry hides a secret you'll never expect. Giant trees became houses that breathed with the wind. Yet how did they stand for centuries without nails? In the towering forests of the Pacific Northwest, native peoples like the Haida, Tlingit, and Coast Salish transformed cedar giants into houses that could last generations. Western red cedar, some trees over 1,000 years old and standing more than 200 feet high, was the perfect material. Resistant to rot, naturally insect repellent, and flexible enough to shift with storms. Massive cedar planks, sometimes 20 inches wide, were split from trunks using stone wedges and fire. These planks weren't nailed, nails didn't exist here, but were slotted into grooves cut into beams, tied with plant fiber ropes, or simply leaned against the sturdy frames. The result? Houses that could be dismantled, moved, and rebuilt with ease. Early explorers in the 18th century wrote in amazement at plank houses so large they hosted 40 to 50 people inside, with fire pits burning down the center. The architecture wasn't just functional, it was symbolic. Carved house posts often rose at the entrances, telling family histories through totemic art. Inside, smoke escaped through roof gaps, while the walls breathed with the wind, expanding and contracting without splitting apart. Some plank houses stood for centuries, passed from one generation to the next, their cedar still aromatic and strong long after European timber homes collapsed. Modern engineers studying these structures note that cedar planks' natural oils made them resistant to decay for hundreds of years. Unlike rigid nailed boards, the flexible joins meant the house could sway instead of snap during storms. Isn't it fascinating that primitive design solved problems modern builders still face with earthquakes and climate damage? Strength, beauty, portability, all born from living trees. Yet while the Northwest built castles from wood, other tribes turned soil itself into homes that worked like natural machines. How did Earth become an air conditioner long before electricity? Earth lodges acted like ancient air conditioners, cool in summer and warm in winter. But what secret design kept them so stable? Across the Great Plains, tribes like the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara built homes that seemed almost alive. These weren't flimsy tents or temporary shelters. They were monumental earth lodges that could stand strong for decades. Each one measured 30 to 60 feet across, enough to hold entire families, food stores, and even ceremonial spaces. But the real magic? The temperature inside. Travelers in the 18th century wrote in disbelief that earth lodges stayed cozy in minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit winters and refreshingly cool when summer heat topped 90 degrees Fahrenheit. How was that possible without air conditioners or heaters? The answer lies in soil physics. Builders layered heavy wooden frames with willow branches, packed them with thick sod and clay, then topped the roof with earth. This earthen shell acted like insulation, keeping out extreme heat and trapping warmth like a natural thermos. The lodges didn't just survive, they thrived. Records from Lewis and Clark's expedition in 1804 describe Mandan villages with dozens of these structures, arranged in circles like small cities. Inside, central hearths provided cooking and warmth, while smoke holes above allowed air circulation. The combination created a self-regulating system modern architects would call passive heating and cooling. Even the structure itself was genius. A central framework of 12 to 15 huge logs held up the roof, distributing weight evenly so the lodge could withstand blizzards and tornado-force winds. The earth covering wasn't dead weight. It bonded the home to the landscape, making it nearly invisible from afar and protective against enemies. Many lasted 30 to 40 years before needing major repairs, far longer than the average wooden cabins built by European settlers nearby. Isn't it remarkable that the so-called primitive houses often outperformed modern ones? But if soil could create climate-proof homes, what about snow? Something softer, colder, seemingly impossible to live in. Yet snow itself became a fortress in one of the harshest environments on Earth. How did blocks of frozen water outmatch its steel in strength? Inuit igloos built from snow blocks resisted Arctic storms stronger than steel. So why did they melt into nothing without tools? The Arctic is one of the harshest places on Earth. Temperatures often plunge below -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and winds howl at speeds of 70 miles per hour. In such a place, survival demands genius. The Inuit met that challenge with an invention so simple, yet so brilliant that it still astonishes engineers today: the igloo. An igloo wasn't just a snow hut. Built from compacted blocks of snow, cut with knives carved from bone or later metal, it followed a perfect spiral pattern. Each block leaned inward, locking into place, until the dome closed at the top with a keystone. No nails, no glue, just snow and precision. The result? A structure so strong it could hold the weight of a man standing on its roof. Modern tests have shown igloos can support over 400 pounds without collapsing. And the warmth, this is where it feels like magic. While outside temperatures drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, inside the igloo, the body heat of just 1 or 2 people, combined with a small oil lamp, could raise the temperature to a livable 20 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. The snow's tiny air pockets acted like insulation, trapping warmth while blocking icy winds. Isn't it amazing that frozen water became a heater? But igloos weren't permanent. Once spring arrived, the very material that protected families melted back into the land, leaving no trace. In a way, they were both fortress and ghost, powerful in the moment, fleeting in the long run. Inuit oral histories even describe travelers building emergency igloos in under an hour, a skill that could mean life or death in sudden blizzards. If snow could be shaped into castles of survival, what about stone cliffs? Because in the deserts of the Southwest, people built entire cities tucked high into canyon walls. How did they even get there without ropes or scaffolds? Cliff dwellings clung to sheer canyon walls for nearly 1,000 years. But how did builders without ropes or scaffolds reach them? High in the sandstone cliffs of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, once called the Anasazi, created homes that seem impossible even today. From 500 CE to 1300 CE, they built entire villages tucked into caves and sheer rock faces. The most famous, Mesa Verde in Colorado, still stands with more than 600 cliff dwellings, some containing up to 150 rooms. The question everyone asks, how did they get there? Archaeologists studying handholds carved into cliff walls discovered they were essentially vertical staircases. Climbers used fingers and toes to scale cliffs hundreds of feet high, sometimes carrying baskets of food or building materials. Imagine doing that daily with no ropes, no ladders, just skill, courage, and balance. These dwellings weren't random hideouts. They were carefully engineered apartments. Walls were built of sandstone blocks, held together with Adobe mortar, while ceilings were supported by timbers carried from forests miles away. Some structures rose 4 stories tall, complete with kivas, circular ceremonial rooms dug into the rock. Archaeologists even found traces of plaster and paint, proving that walls were once decorated in vibrant colors. Cliff homes offered incredible advantages. The overhanging rock acted like a natural roof, shielding against rain, snow, and the blazing desert sun. This meant interiors stayed cool in summer and warmer in winter, much like a built-in thermostat. And from a defensive standpoint, nearly perfect. Invaders would have to scale dangerous cliffs while residents rained down stones or arrows from above. By the late 1200s, many cliff dwellings were mysteriously abandoned. Some scholars blame drought, others social upheaval. Yet the buildings themselves remain, still gripping the canyon walls after 700 years of storms and erosion. Wigwams bent with hurricanes instead of breaking. But what hidden material allowed such flexibility? In the forests of the Northeast, native peoples like the Wampanoag, Abenaki, and Algonquin perfected a shelter that seemed simple but was surprisingly advanced: the wigwam. Unlike the towering plank houses of the Northwest, wigwams were smaller, dome-shaped homes, usually 10 to 16 feet across, designed for families. But their genius lay in how they moved with nature. Builders started with green saplings, often young birch, elm, or ash. These flexible poles were bent into arches and tied together at the top, forming a rounded skeleton. Over this frame, mats of woven cattails, bark panels, or animal hides were layered. The curved shape let hurricanes and winter storms roll over the wigwam instead of ripping it apart. European colonists marveled that while their own cabins splintered in gales, wigwams bent, creaked, and then sprang back. Inside, the temperature stayed surprisingly comfortable. In winter, bark layers held in warmth from the central fire, while in summer, mats could be lifted to let breezes flow through. Early settlers wrote that the design was more agreeable in hot weather than our own houses. Archaeologists estimate that a well-built wigwam could last 2 to 3 years before materials were refreshed, perfect for mobile societies following seasonal cycles. Flexibility wasn't weakness, it was survival. A rigid log cabin might collapse under snow weight, but a wigwam simply shrugged it off. Its rounded dome also echoed spiritual beliefs. Many nations viewed the circle as sacred, representing the cycles of life. From bending trees came bending homes, shelters that could bow to the storm yet never break. But what if the storm wasn't wind, but fire and ash? In Iceland, settlers faced volcanic winters and solved it with walls of grass. Icelandic sod homes survived volcanic winters. So what made walls of grass stronger than stone? When Norse settlers arrived in Iceland around 874 CE, they faced a brutal land of lava fields, icy winds, and volcanic ash. Timber was scarce, stone was heavy, and winters could last 8 months. Yet instead of freezing, they built homes from the very earth beneath their feet. Sod houses. These weren't crude huts. Archaeological studies show walls up to 1 meter thick, made by stacking blocks of turf. Dense grass and soil cut into neat rectangles. Sod has natural insulation, tiny air pockets in the soil trap heat, while grass roots knit the blocks together like living glue. A properly built sod house could stay around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit inside, even when blizzards outside dropped below -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Roofs were masterpieces of practicality. Wooden frames, imported driftwood or timber from Norway, supported layers of birch bark topped with more turf. From a distance, these homes blended into the hills, looking like grassy mounds. The design cut wind resistance to almost zero, allowing them to withstand gales over 100 miles per hour. By the 18th century, records suggest that nearly half of Iceland's population still lived in turf homes. They weren't temporary shelters. They became multi-generational farmsteads, some standing strong for over 200 years with maintenance. Visitors described entering dim, smoky halls lined with benches where entire families cooked, worked, and sang while storms raged outside. Even volcanic ash couldn't break them. After eruptions, people repaired sod walls with new turf, essentially regrowing their homes. Today, restored examples like the turf houses at Glomber still stand, teaching architects about eco-friendly building. Isn't it striking that blocks of grass often outlasted castles of stone? From volcanic winters to blazing deserts, different landscapes forced different solutions. In the American Southwest, builders didn't dig into sod. They raised entire clay cities that still tower today. Pueblos rose from desert clay into multi-story cities. How did they resist centuries of rain and wind erosion? In the dry mesas and river valleys of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans turned clay, sand, straw, and water into cities that still stand after nearly a millennium. These structures, called pueblos, from the Spanish word for town, weren't single houses. They were apartment complexes rising 4 and 5 stories high, with hundreds of interconnected rooms. The most famous, Taos Pueblo in New Mexico, has been continuously occupied for over 1,000 years. That means families live in the same Adobe buildings today that their ancestors built before Columbus ever set sail. How does mud endure that long? The secret lies in Adobe. When clay and straw dry in the sun, they harden into bricks that resist cracking. Add wooden vigas, beams for support, and the walls become both strong and flexible, bending slightly with wind and settling instead of shattering. Adobe also regulates temperature. In scorching summers, its thick walls absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, keeping interiors around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, even when outside temperatures top 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In winter, the same walls trap fire warmth, reducing the need for fuel. Archaeologists studying Chaco Canyon estimate some pueblos had 600 rooms, arranged around plazas with ceremonial kivas dug into the earth. These weren't just homes, they were social and spiritual centers. Rain and erosion, though rare in the desert, were handled by careful maintenance. Families replastered their walls each year with fresh clay, turning upkeep into a cultural ritual. That's why Taos Pueblo and Acoma Pueblo, often called Sky City, still rise today, their golden walls glowing against the desert sun. If adobe cities could last 1,000 years, what about portable homes made to rise and fall with the seasons? On the open plains, families carried shelters that could stand against the 60-mile-an-hour winds and still be set up in minutes. Teepees stood tall in winds over 60 miles an hour. Yet what clever trick let families set them up in minutes? On the open plains, where storms roll without warning and buffalo once roamed in herds of 30 million, native nations like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfoot created the perfect mobile home, the teepee. Tall, conical, and surprisingly aerodynamic, these shelters weren't fragile tents. They were marvels of design that could be built or taken down in less than an hour. A typical teepee used 12 to 20 lodge poles, each sometimes 20 to 25 feet long, arranged in a cone and tied with rawhide. Over this frame, women stretched sewn buffalo hides, up to 14 hides per shelter, which created a weatherproof cover. The slanted cone shape let prairie winds sweep around the structure instead of ripping through it, allowing teepees to withstand gusts over 60 miles per hour that flattened wooden cabins. Temperature control was equally ingenious. In summer, lower flaps could be lifted for ventilation, while in winter, extra hides sealed the base and an interior lining created insulation. A central fire burned safely inside, with smoke escaping through adjustable flaps at the top. Early settlers, amazed by the efficiency, admitted teepees were warmer in winter and cooler in summer than their own homes. Teepees also symbolized mobility. A family could follow buffalo migrations, pack their home onto a horse in minutes, and rebuild it at the next camp. Some ethnographers noted that a skilled family could erect a full teepee in under 30 minutes. This portability was survival itself on the plains. The design carried spiritual meaning too. Many nations saw the circle as sacred, and the teepee's round base reflected that belief. Each pole represented unity, each hide the protection of the earth. If mobility and strength defined teepees, what about permanence? Some homes weren't meant to move at all, yet they've outlasted concrete and steel. How could houses built without nails endure longer than modern buildings? Homes built without nails outlasted modern concrete buildings. But what forgotten knowledge turned fragile materials into timeless architecture? Walk through the American Southwest, the Arctic, or the windy plains, and you'll still see traces of homes built centuries ago. Pueblos of Adobe, turf houses of Iceland, cedar plank halls, even cliff dwellings clinging to rock faces. Many of these structures are 700 to 1,000 years old, yet they remain standing. Compare that to many modern concrete buildings, which engineers admit often have a lifespan of just 50 to 100 years before cracking, corroding, or being torn down. How did ancient builders without steel nails or cement manage greater endurance? The answer lies in design rooted in harmony with nature. Materials weren't forced into rigid molds. They were chosen to bend, breathe, and adapt. Adobe absorbed heat and moisture, then released them slowly, avoiding stress fractures. Sod homes regrew themselves, with grass roots holding walls firm. Cedar planks swelled and shrank with rain, flexing instead of splitting. Igloos even melted harmlessly back into the land, leaving no ruins behind. Annual maintenance was another secret. Pueblo families replastered walls each year, turning construction into ritual. Wigwam coverings were replaced every few seasons, keeping them fresh and flexible. Instead of abandoning homes when parts failed, people renewed them, like living architecture. Archaeologists studying these structures note the paradox. Homes built with what outsiders called fragile materials, mud, grass, bark, snow, proved stronger across centuries than reinforced concrete. Why? Because they worked with the environment, not against it. Today, architects call this sustainable building. For native peoples, it was simply survival. From cedar forests to frozen tundra, these designs carried families through storms, wars, and droughts. They weren't just shelters. They were proof that humans could build for generations, not decades. And maybe the biggest revelation? The secrets of these primitive homes may hold the blueprint for solving our modern housing crisis. Isn't it astonishing that the future might depend on the past? You've just unlocked secrets hidden for centuries. But there's so much more. More stories, more mysteries, more survival genius. Watch the next video to keep the journey alive. Subscribe to stay part of this story and never miss another revelation.